Well, it's lovely to be here with you all. I've been looking forward to introduce you, Scott, to everybody and to reconnect for a bit of a dialogue. This is actually one of the conversations which I have no idea how to introduce, to be honest with you. So I'm going to imagine as though I'm not doing a recording at all and just say, how you doing? And how did you come to do what you're doing? And what even is it that you are doing?
Hello. Hi, my name is Scott Beibin, and I like to do things. I started off doing things when I was very young, and I'm still doing things. And I like to encourage people to do things as well. And I love being around people doing things and thinking about things and thinking about how to do things. Uh, I guess it all started when I was pretty young, as I mentioned. And I just really gravitated toward anything oriented around creativity. It was always building things, it was writing and making music. I became interested in science very early, as well as philosophy, and I couldn't get enough. I was very interested in reading science text and experimenting with things. I was also very interested in science fiction. And I just was a sponge, I guess. And in my early years, I was on track to probably becoming an aerospace and robotics engineer. And at that time, it was actually very difficult to become either one of those things unless you're willing to work in the military industrial complex. And at a certain point, I started to feel a real inner conflict about pursuing those things. When I came to that realization, I became a bit of a pacifist when I was in my mid-teens, and the reconciliation for that was basically starting to just pursue social science and other things that I was not very familiar with. And that wound up taking me down a route with getting involved in independent publishing and uh, just doing zines and other things like that, just being very involved in underground scenes. Then I started a record label, which was called Bloodlink Records. It was a DIY punk political hardcore label. I started that in 1992, and that lasted until about 2006. It was many years of my life. I've been involved with starting a pirate radio station and a band called the Bike Orchestra that I built instruments out of bicycle parts and skateboards and had a puppet show that went along with that. I was also building giant puppets for protests. I was living in West Philadelphia, which is kind of known for um, it's kind of known for being an activist and arts hub, at least in the mid 90s, where a lot of people were congregating who were experimenting with their lives and doing all kinds of zany, crazy things. I was part of that ferment of whatever that is and was and continues to be. Uh, I became very interested in media activism sometime in the late 90s because we had a really there
Scott, we lost you slightly there. So you said that you became really interested in media activism because
yeah
something.
so I became very interested in media activism. Thank you again. Yeah. Okay. How's my signal right now?
Yeah, it's okay. You're coming
Better.
through. We might have a couple dropouts here and there, but
Better.
I'll let you know.
Okay, cool. So I became interested in media activism as a way to deal with the intense censorship that we had in the mainstream news media here in the U.S. Meaning that if there was um, any type of abuse of power by police or military, you would really never hear about it. And those things were pretty prevalent in, when it came to the US. So it was frustrating that as a person who was reading a lot of news from around the world, there was a lack of understanding like around me. And so that kind of shaped a lot of my desire to get involved in independent publishing and eventually starting a thing called the Lost Film Festival. So in 1999, I met these kids from Philadelphia. They were high school students. Their names were Mike and Scott, and they wanted to have a film festival in a like in a park near like in their town. And I'd been very interested in film for a while, and I was doing a bunch of culture jamming stuff, or this is the beginning of it. And I said, hey, why don't we form a collective? And so I got very interested in teaching them consensus decision making processes and whatnot. And this is the very beginning of this whole kind of like digital video revolution, so to say, because up until that point, if you wanted to get involved in film or video, it's actually very expensive. Because video cameras, aside from the like cheap consumer ones, were very they were very difficult to come by, and you weren't able to get to an editing station very easily. So there's a very large barrier to entry at that point, but like a very large barrier to entry to get into independent media making. But I was also a huge collector of independent media, just obscure films from around the world, protest footage, all this type of stuff. And these are the things that ended up being included in the Lost Film Festival, which went from being an event organized in Philly to Philadelphia, where I am. And I started to tour around with it. I went to film festivals all over the world, and then eventually it became a storytelling and radical media thing. And that's what it remained until it wrapped up in around 2010. In 2002, I started a thing called the Evil Twin Booking Agency with my partner, Elizabeth. And we came up with this idea to create a culture jamming project. So how could we take the voices of the people from the films that I was showing in Lost Film Festival, with people who are largely making documentary films, how could we bring them out into this whole circuit that I was touring in with the Lost Film Fest? Now, I was touring in this whole circuit of the punk scene and different underground art scenes, and it's generally kind of like a not very established thing. But it was a very kind of like it was an underground thing for sure. Also in the kind of underground rave scene of the time, and also rainbow culture, all this other fun stuff. One of the groups of people that we were working with are called the Yes Men. And these are pranksters who would pose as representatives of corporations and governments, and then go into contexts like television and conferences, posing as these corporations, and then apologizing for actual wrongdoings and things that were being kept secret. So I was trying to figure out how to get these guys out into the world, and other filmmakers like Sam Green, or the people who were making big noise films. These were all part of my scene. Another guy, Boots Riley, who's currently a filmmaker, but he was in a band called The Coup. So we collected all these people. It was kind of like an activist and arts and science and investigative journalist menagerie. and we gave it a very friendly kind of Silicon Valley and tech aesthetic on the website, even though ideas like this typically were a bit more kind of like, you know, dark and whatnot. But we give it a very friendly look, and we wind up getting a lot of interest from institutions, a lot of universities, museums, sometimes companies and bigger festivals. And so really the idea was to take a lot of the people that we were working with and bring them into a larger context, where they would have the message that they were trying to communicate completely intact, and where it wouldn't be watered down or modified. And so that project still exists to this day. And yeah, where Liz and I do Evil Twin booking, and it's fun. So kind of zipping forward a little bit to the future.
Yeah, well, I'm curious, throughout this time, how much of your, you mentioned aerospace and sort of maybe frustrations with not being able to pursue that unless it was part of the military industrial complex. How much was, you know, how much were you actively engaged in engineering and technology and that in that sense throughout that time? Or was it something you picked back up? And what was it that you started to pick back up, and what motivated you to be interested in researching the kind of technologies you are now? I'll just share one image for the group and see if you can, work your way to this point in terms of what comes up. But there was a moment when we were at a site in Egypt, and a group of 6 to 7 of us were sort of all standing in a in a semicircle around Scott with no space between us to sort of block the inspectors and people who were taking us on the trip from, or who were sort of, formally appointed to go alongside our trip, to make sure we weren't doing anything untoward. And Scott had this scanning technology with him, and we blocked out space so they wouldn't see what was going on, but they kind of figured something was going on. And, it's kind of ridiculous, really, because we're just there with obviously what are not just rocks, but you could just take a look at it and just look like there's a guy with some scanning equipment and there's a rock, and like no one's harming anything. There's a stone with a cylindrical shape that's been hewn out of it, and some what look to the uninitiated like me like sort of screwdriver marks, very lightly inside the cylinder. And Scott's doing a scan there to try to understand, well, what kind of technology might have been used in this stonework. And so, and there's you there, massive backpacks, carrying them across the desert. And we're all kind of wondering, is he going to be able to do his research at this site, or are they going to stop him again? And so we're all trying to make that happen. Meanwhile, contemplating just what's going on here and how were these constructed. And I know that you're interested in doing that because you also have views about the world and maybe where you see it going and how you'd like to be of service to some sort of response to that. So what brings you to that moment that we shared together last year? That would be my question.
Well, to answer the first part of the question, so I was, as a teenager, or by the time I became a teenager, I was very in aerospace. I wound up going to a thing called Space Camp twice in Huntsville, Alabama, at the Space and Rocket Center. And in the second year, my mission mentor was actually a guy named Conrad Dannenberg, who was the person who initiated the Saturn V rocket program. He was also a person who was brought over to the United States for NASA. And what was interesting about that is that he was the right hand for a guy named Werner von Braun, who is, I guess, known as one of the fathers of the American rocketry program. But before Wernher von Braun and Konrad Dannenberg were in the U.S. building rockets, they were building rockets for the Nazis in Germany. And so pretty much they were given an offer by the US government that said, okay, you can come and work with us or you're going to uh, probably get hanged. And they decided to go and work in the US. And what came from that is the space program and landing humans on the moon and all that other stuff. I don't think that they were particularly pleased with being part of the Nazi party, but they seem to just want to do science and kind of over a barrel, either doing it for the Germans or for doing it for US, but they ended up succeeding in their mission. And so my mentor was this guy, Konrad Dannenberg. I did an experiment which was diffraction of laser light through atmospheres, which is a fancy way of saying I had access to a laser and I pointed the laser at a fish tank full of water and antifreeze, and it was measuring just see how yeah how the laser light would bend. Anyway, yeah, it was a project where I was looking at laser telemetry. I'm probably 15 years old, and at a certain point, when I started developing more as in terms of my politics, I started to realize what all this was for, and I was kind of horrified by it. The knowledge that what I was studying at space camp was largely used for telemetry for missiles, and not just for the space program. And also, I became aware of Operation Paperclip and other secret programs that the U.S. engaged in, things like MK Ultra, and all these other things. Because I was lucky enough to have a fantastic library in the town where I did a lot of my growing up. So I was introduced to a lot of these things and kind of all shifted there. Now, I did maintain my interest in pursuing science. Science is a thought process, like basically deductive and inductive reasoning, rational thought, observation. These are all very important things through my life in terms of problem solving. It's just that I had stepped away from design of technology for a long time. And then in the 2000s, I kind of returned to that by becoming a part of one of the more international hacker scenes. Started helping to organize at an event called Hackers on Planet Earth, and I was involved with a thing called the Chaos Communications Congress, which is one of the longest running hacker conferences on the planet. I've spoken there a few times. I go there. I have fantastic friends from there, and yeah, highly recommend going to anybody who's listening to this. It's a fantastic event full of lots of people who think and act and and design things on frontiers of knowledge. Anyway, about 2010, I became very interested in 3D printing and had this idea to bring together a lot of my creative projects into a thing called Scientists Are the New Rock Stars, which is a kind of touring stage show that I was doing concurrent with Lost Film Fest, which then morphed into a thing called Groucho Fractal, which I came up with this idea to do a bicycle-powered stage performance where audience members would use brain-computer interface as a way of making 3D printed organic vegan snacks on a bicycle powered 3D food printer. None of these things were available widely at that time. Um, I didn't really know much about how to do these things, except I had this idea of how to figure it out because I was in this hacker scene, and I was also in a lot of other kind of culture jamming and uh, alternative and natural building and ecotech scenes and all these other things. So I was kind of like searching for these threads of knowledge. And by 2011 and 2012, I pulled together this actual show. So I started to work with EEG and use EEG as a way of triggering events in a piece of software called Blender, kind of very early version of Blender. And I was using a lot of code to do this. I had a bunch of amazing helpers, people who helped me to understand things, who were uh, absolute geniuses, people like, just say, Brian Cohen and Adolf Alexander, Josh Gorno, Dan Kaminsky, rest in peace. And yeah, Ozymandias. I mean, so many different people were helping me to pull this together. And I wound up touring a bunch with this show, just bringing my bicycle generator around, which is basically a stand that had a, um, a DC motor on it, and I was making that spin and then using that to power a to well, basically uh, charge up a battery, and I had a pack of supercapacitors with it. I was using the condition circuit, and the whole show consisted of me explaining how all this stuff worked. It was essentially a really fun science education uh, stage performance. And one of the things that I found is very useful, which I guess you guys might find very useful, is to use creativity as an excuse to learn as much as you possibly can about whatever topic it is that you're interested in. And that was one of the things that was super important to me. Uh, Thinking about doing uh, things that I might have thought impossible. If I thought it was impossible, it was like, okay, hey, that means I have to pursue it. How am I going to do this? And so I developed this whole technique of breaking things down into their smallest components and figuring out like how do I do things on this timeline? And I started to use a lot of the open source tools that were beginning to become available, for organizing thoughts, things like Kanban boards and other types of data visualization tools and CAD modeling, all this fun stuff. And as a result of that, I wound up getting interested in 3D scanning. So at the time, I started a project called Mandelbot Ecotech, grew out of a project called SorcerBot that I was doing. But Mandelbot Ecotech, I wound up meeting Lucy Chapar, who is another wizard in 3D modeling and 3D printing and all that. And we hacked a Kinect, which is a kind of a video game controller that happens to have a LiDAR scanner built onto it. And so we hacked this and started to learn about how LiDAR actually works. Yeah. It was interesting actually having this background in understanding the physics of parallax, or having two views, this kind of stereoscopic view, that where you're focusing on one point, and then you can determine the distance between the eyes and the point, through triangulation. And so this concept was an important concept to have my head wrapped around, because the LiDAR device that I was using, this Kinect, basically used 2 cameras and an infrared laser that would scan back and forth an object, and it would create a what's called a point cloud, which is a fancy word for a 3-dimensional grid. And so wherever the laser would hit on the surface of whatever it was trying to scan, it would create a 3D impression thing. This was a pretty, I don't know, I guess it was an amazing technology to look at, and we started to scan all different types of things. And so that wound up turning into it turned into a part of the Groucho Fractal show that is called Ancient Scan. In 2020, I wound up going to Egypt on New Year's Eve to celebrate my 30th vegan anniversary. So my 30th anniversary of being vegan. And I was interested in visiting some of these sites that I'd heard there were anomalous tool marks. So I went to sites like Abu Sir, Abu Ghurab, Abu Rawash, and it was pretty fascinating. Also, I was on the Giza Plateau as well, and kind of looking at these very strange tool marks that looked like machining to me. Going there, I took a lot of photos because I wanted to do photogrammetry with a lot of the things, but I had this idea in my mind that I wanted to do 3D scanning, and I had this whole idea of bring my Kinect scanner with me when I returned. A few months before I returned in late 2020, I was on a tour with some YouTubers, a channel called Uncharted X, and I had this idea of bringing an iPhone 12, which my partner Liz had, and bringing an iPad 11 Pro. And both of them had LiDAR built into them, and they had applications that you could use to do rudimentary LiDAR scanning. And so that was really the beginning of this kind of ancient scan project, where I would start going around and doing 3-dimensional mapping of all the stuff. One thing I did not mention is that while I was in university, I was studying anthropology and archaeology. So that's kind of like where a lot of that interest started. Yeah, so I went there, and one of the things about going and doing research in Egypt is that it's kind of difficult to get permissions from the Ministry of Antiquities to do research, because they like, understandably, they want to protect the antiquities that are there. They don't want people messing about. I did visits to some of these places, like private permission visits to places that are off limits to the public. Can have a little bit of time, like more time than if you're just kind of going there. Well, you actually have time at all, and going to some of these places that aren't really being viewed by their people. And so I started doing a lot of the LiDAR scanning there, which has continued over the past several years. Just kind of going back, and originally was just doing LiDAR scanning with mobile devices, but then I started to bring my more fancy industrial grade devices. I have a LiDAR scanner that's normally used for inspection, like industrial inspection, looking at fissures and rocket engines and these types of things, just looking for these, for faults. So I started to bring my device with me, and also these devices require a lot of processing power. So it's hard to bring um, a giant desktop in a backpack and power it and whatnot. So finally, I was able to get a laptop with a very powerful processor that was able to deal with it, and I was able to get a battery pack that was strong enough to power the LiDAR scanner. So everything was kind of like in this compact thing that it could now travel around with, like kind of pull it out, boot it up, do the scans, and get out, so that I can uh, get the scans of the stuff that I'm looking for. And as you mentioned earlier, in terms of the tool marks, that's really what I'm very interested in. I'm interested in the anomalous tool marks that seem like they were made by some type of advanced machining technique. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm very interested in the idea of reverse engineering. I'm very interested in craft and precision. Um, so these things are a bit of a mystery. When we see these tube, what people call tube drill holes, that are actually kind of conical a little bit. I've done a lot of scanning of these things. There's a kind of a taper to them, but people do call them tube drills. But I'm not. I mean, I guess you do use a tube, but it does have a taper on it. But what's really interesting about this is that there are threads inside, and inside the tubes, and also the core samples that are taken out. So I'm doing a lot of LiDAR scanning of that type of thing, um, which is not as precise as using uh, techniques like CMM, but yeah. Anyway, I wanted to kind of go and explore stuff that way. Additionally, I was very interested in seeing the way that sound propagates across some of these spaces. Um, what I've what I've noticed through doing both 3D scanning of some of the spaces, like volumetric scanning, as well as doing high quality uh, audio recording, and doing convolution, like what's a process called convolution reverb on this, in order to um, duplicate the reverberant qualities of some of these spaces. I started to discover a lot of similarities in the tones that that are the kind of like the resonant frequencies of some of these spaces, and kind of like analyzing that. So a lot of my work focuses on trying to at least see what's going on in terms of the way that sound propagates across the spaces. Additionally, LiDAR scanning tool marks like the tubular drill holes, and additionally also the kind of like cut marks into incredibly hard stone and scoop marks. Um, uh, I'm very interested in this stuff because I want to understand it better. I'm a little frustrated by a bit of the sensationalism around it that we see on the internet, because it muddies the waters around it. But I am happy that people are getting interested in this type of thing. But I really kind of want to understand a bit more about it. So that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of carting around a LiDAR scanner and a giant laptop and a backpack, and kind of trudging around through the sand.
Awesome.
And
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Thank you. So there's a lot there. I'm going to invite everyone in if you would like to step in to ask a question now, you're very welcome. At some point, I'd love to ask you to take us on a little bit more and speak to what you are over here in Australia in part four recently, because that's part of your work that I know is an active piece and I'm curious about. So, bookmarking that perhaps if that unfolds a bit later. I, I am just curious to ask what your reflections were on the work you were able to do in Egypt in October, November. Were you happy with any of the scans you were able to get? Were they able to advance any of your understanding? And where are you sort of at with that now? And from here, please, everybody, feel welcome to jump in.
And well, to answer the questions, so I was there with you in October. I actually went back in February and April of this year. Part of what I'm doing is putting together complete pictures. Yeah, I would say I was definitely able to advance the project, at least in understanding. My technique basically is um, to do rough scans of areas with set and setting, and also to look at things uh, like direction, to kind of understand where actually, how things are oriented according to magnetic north. So basically what I do is low resolution scanning of spaces first, tile it all together. So I take all the pieces and kind of put them all together, because with LiDAR scanning with mobile devices, it's a lot of processing, and there's a lot of room for error. So it's better to kind of scan bits and pieces, then stop it, let the phone or let the iPad or whatever cool down a bit, and then start over again. So I was able to get a lot of those bits, and um, yeah, and then the next technique that I use is to go back to those spaces with precision instruments, and then I plug those pieces the into the point clouds. So basically, the point cloud is like
We missed that a little
like a
bit there, Scott.
three-dimensional mesh. Yeah.
Ah,
So
there it
a
came
point
back.
cloud is a three-dimensional. Sorry. So a point cloud is a three-dimensional polygonal mesh, meaning it's like lots of dots that you can turn into triangles, and then over that we will overlay photos. But really, the important bit of this is the mesh. And then what I do is I will take that kind of like low resolution mesh and then plug in the high resolution mesh into all that, and then try to match up all the photos. And so uh, it was pretty great being on this tour that our friend Carl Hayden Smith organized, because I was able to get into some places with special private permissions that I hadn't been. One of them, namely, is the Black Pyramid, which was fantastic because it had a lot of those spaces in there that um, have these very strange reverberant acoustic properties. I was able to um, spend time in the Great Pyramid. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to document document too much, because the guards were pretty upset that I brought in a bunch of equipment with me. But I was also able to do some scans of um, the pile of red granite rectangular blocks that people call a sarcophagus. at the bottom of the Djoser Stair Pyramid in Saqqara. That was pretty amazing because I'd been trying to visit that for a while, and it was really cool kind of going in there and looking at a lot of the precision stonework vessels that were broken. There's just so many pieces of these vessels everywhere down in these catacombs, deep underneath the Saqqara Plateau. And yeah, it was really it was overall very fantastic. I thought it was a very well organized tour. It was a real whirlwind, though. It's like very intense. We're just kind of, we have a private permission, and then we get on a bus and go to the next private permission, and it was super hot, and it was just like a lot to keep up with, but it was really fantastic and dense with information and lots of incredibly knowledgeable and super cool people on the tour. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for asking about the progress on that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so I hold a lot of different questions in relation to some of this stuff. Takes me back to some of the writing and attempts I was doing to think about the whole phenomena of Egypt and the whole zeitgeist interest around forgotten civilizations, or at the very least, lines of technological development that we may not seem not to have access to, and then trying to understand, ask questions at a philosophical level around where or how we might be ignorant of different modes of tool making, of different lines in the study of tech. And I really don't know about all those sorts of things. I mean, some of the conversations on the podcast around magic, um, around influence without being caught immediately in terms of thinking of causation, in terms of, efficient causation, but wanting to understand other modes of causation. And then, of course, given Forrest is in the chat, he'll speak about the relation between choice, change, and causation. And anyway, so lots of sort of questions in there. And yeah, I remain very curious, but I'll open it up if anybody else would like to share a little bit, anything they'd like to ask or contribute. And I think as well, it would be more than welcome just to share your own sense of seeking and mystery in a more general sense. And Scott and everyone else is welcome to respond to that. So, of course, you're welcome to ask questions to Scott directly, but also if there's something in the shared exploration space you just want to contribute to, that's welcome as well.
Well, I want to pick up on the technique of parallax that LiDAR is using. And then also one of the remarks that you made towards the end, just before Scott, regarding being on a trip with so many different perspectives coming from so many different knowledge bases, and the parallax that can be drawn out from that. Hence the conversation here. Yeah. There's something to do with, there's questions that have something to do with the experiences that result in a perspective or a perception that is inclined towards the fringes, that which is being repressed and forced into some kind of mystique. I did have that kind of front of mind throughout the sharing, Scott. And then there's like the hard questions of what kind of geometric resonances are being mapped out and what kind of tech is being used to craft the spaces which bring that about. I don't have a direct question. I think I'm just speaking to how I was hearing everything shared so far. But yes.
Well, those are some really good feedback and thoughts. I appreciate that. Well, let's see. You mentioned a few different things. Okay. One of the things you asked about was being on the trip with many different perspectives. So for me, it's infinitely valuable to be around people who think about things, and sometimes ways that are deeply different than I think about things, or similar. One of the things that I found pretty useful in my life is going to places where I guess people are on the fringes, and exploring their imaginations. Like a lot of the time, kind of like entheogenic communities, communities oriented around meditation and flow, uh, ones that are looking at ecstatic experiences, and also ones that are kind of on the frontiers of, science and technology. And to me, all these things seem pretty related, in that we're all kind of like essentially subjecting ourselves to experimentation with varying degrees of documentation, but experiments nevertheless. And so this group of people that Carl put together were all experimenters, all people who are thinkers and doers and feelers. So this is the kind of community that I absolutely love being in. I wound up making a lot of friends that I still stay in pretty good touch with, and I think that's pretty valuable, to be around people doing things that they're where they're pursuing their heart's interest, their mind's interest, and approaching their life philosophically in that way, and actually living by those ideas. So for me, it was incredibly healthy and helpful. And I guess you're mentioning also this idea of being on the fringes. Um, for me, I guess I kind of like, I think of things that sometimes people say, "Oh, this is on the fringe. These things are on the fringe." I actually think that the most healthy way of thinking about things tends to be what current, like, mainstream capitalist society tends to think about as fringes. That I think that living one's life through exploration is really the basis, because there aren't necessarily any rules, like that by having these kind of narrow ways of thinking about things that have been prescribed by what's acceptable in whatever society, by these institutions like governments or businesses or religions or militaries, or any of these kind of other like rigid thought processes that have very particular ways of thinking about of things. Like they have particular worldviews. And to me, that seems to be the most fraught way of living life, because it's kind of like you have to shut off your brain, or parts of your brain, and shut off your heart in certain ways, to be able uh, to deal with preventing yourself from exploring those spaces and exploring what it is to be alive, and to explore meaning and our place in nature. And so to me, that kind of rigidity is that's really the fringe. It's the place where you can kind of fall off. It's the place with the least amount of stability, because it's so important for us to actually deal with what it is that is our core, our bodies, our minds, our spirits. That's the real basis. It's not the fringe. It's actually the kind of core of all of it. So I just kind of want to throw that out there as maybe a way of thinking about stuff, because sometimes people are in those kind of narrow thought processes. Will try to make people who think about these things feel as if they're on the margins, whereas
Well,
actually, yeah.
I would love to just briefly respond to what you've been saying there. And you ended up saying at the end what was on my mind, the relation between the core and the fringe, and the fact that the technique of triangulating forces us to include another dimension of depth, which then kind of inverts how we might identify with fringe thinking and core thinking, in the sense that, yeah, this one's, you know what, actually, I'm not too sure how to articulate this point around depth perception regarding, I might have to sit with that one for a bit, actually. Thank you for sharing.
Well, if I could just share a couple of thoughts that I have about I guess the depth perception and your in relation to revealing things that are hidden. Everything really is relative, and measurement is, it's an arbitrary thing. Distance is an arbitrary thing. Time and its perception. These are where at least the measurement of these things are social constructs. Time exists, but the concept of 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. This is a culturally created thing. These are arbitrary points on a particular timeline, or that if we're looking at distance, whether it's 1 meter, 2 meters, and those distances, it's been found that these things can warp at various scales. Trying to understand, I guess through the process of science, we try to understand these things. We try to have common understanding by of things by creating systems of measurement, and then we try to disseminate that information and hopefully archive it so that we can all learn from it. But these things are all pretty important for understanding how to navigate the world. These things are hidden, I guess, as you say, like that. This box doesn't have any measurement marks on it. It's kind of it's kind of a hidden, it's a hidden thing to have that understanding, and we're bombarded by concepts and objects and that we think about measuring, and we do come to these common understandings of what these measurements might mean, and through science we go through various interpretations over time what these things could be. But it's always good to kind of keep an open mind about these various things. I need to plug my computer in. Give me 1 second. Hold on. Sorry, I'm at 3% of my battery.
It's an important measurement in this context.
Yeah. And here we go. Hey.
So
yeah. So I just wanted to share one more thought on this. Things that actually exist, there are techniques with which to measure them, or that exist currently, or can be developed, or might be developed in the future. These things are good to have, but it's not always the most important thing to try to measure in order to understand. Sometimes it's perfectly fine to just feel and use our intuition and just enjoy the experience. Sometimes it's fine to play by ear when you're playing music. It's not that important to learn notes and chords and progressions. Like, it's cool to learn that stuff, but it's also perfectly fine to just pick up a musical instrument and noodle around on it and feel through it and just see what you like and explore it that way.
So in Egypt, one of the conjectures, is more than a conjecture, I think, but that is often made, is that the pyramids and various sites were constructed to have some important geographic measurements and solar system measurements as part of their architecture. So facing in a certain way, people have notions of sacred geometry. Even the very meaning of sacred geometry is kind of curious here. I'm interested in how you reflect about what that could mean, because sacred, in a sense, speaks to something sort of inexhaustible about it, but at the same time inherently deepening and intimate. And it's this interesting mixture of a profound sort of knowability and at the same time inexhaustibility and uncontainability. And that knowability and our relation as perceivers, as individuals, as in some respects small to medium-sized creatures in a very vast and very small as well cosmos. We can say on the one hand that knowability that we have is really quite bounded, and yet we take it, there's the way that we, there's a notion of a kind of an aspiration toward knowledge and a capacity to be in contact that seems to have a universalizing nature to it. Not that the measurements we might make in any given situation are to be mistaken for the mode of relation with the sacred as such, but the notion of sacred geometry in the geometry piece is speaking to, I suppose, at the very least, repeatable patterns that present in cosmos as sources for a certain kind of trust, a certain kind of recognition of shape and one's relation to it. It's interesting saying anything about measurement and shape in geometry when Forrest is in the chat, because I'm quite curious for him to be articulating some of this stuff. But the reason why I'm circling around this is I'm curious how you relate, Scott, and then also Forrest, if you return at some point, how, like, what the meaning of sacred geometry could be, and whether or not it's plausible to think that other civilizational epochs and perhaps other ways of building technology or building sites could be more representative of ways of coming into formation or locating themselves in the cosmos in a manner that's different to ours? And could there be something worth aspiring to in that? And how would we ground aspiration in terms of what's worth measuring and what's worth building with the measurements we're making? I'm wanting to bring this notion of kind of the relativity of measurement in touch with something we can relate to with a sense of continuity and aspiration. So that's some of my reflections. And maybe, Forrest, I'll pass it over to Scott. And then I'm curious to hear what you might have been hearing and how you relate to some of this. Thank you.
Well, that's a great question. So sacred geometry is geometry. It is a subset of geometry that is found on sacred sites. Certain repetitive patterns and ratios. And one of the most sacred things, I think, for us as humans, as sentient beings, is it's knowledge. And I think one of the reasons why these patterns and ratios were incorporated into a lot of these sacred sites that were made with stone was as a way to communicate to the subsequent generations of people who would come visit these sites. Because written language, if it's written on paper, is pretty ephemeral. Vocal communication is very ephemeral. We have natural disasters, we have plagues and famine and people getting bored and not wanting to do what their parents or grandparents were doing, you know. So as I think that a lot of the sacred sites that are designed with these patterns and ratios in mind are libraries, physical libraries, where the knowledge that's been accumulated through culture over time is set in stone, where our understanding of mathematics, physics, different engineering concepts, that they're incorporated into these spaces as a way of communicating with subsequent generations of people. And I think a lot of people really think of these as kind of like in this kind of mystical way, because often even in, our ecstatic experiences, like through meditation or entheogens, we also we visualize a lot of these patterns that we can sometimes do by putting a point in the ground and then running a string around, making circles, and then making circles around circles, and or that we observe things like the Fibonacci sequence in various forms of life, whether we're looking at nautilus shells or looking at the way that cells divide. And these things are observable and mysterious, but understandable. And I think that our ancestors who built a lot of these sacred sites, we owe them a great debt of gratitude for communicating in a visual language that which could not be communicated through writing or story. That it's physically there for us to look at. And we find this type of understanding of how matter behaves and all these ratios. We find that all throughout the world. Very similar techniques. That, I mean, there aren't an infinite amount of ways to to visualize the flower of life, or to visualize the golden ratio. It's a pattern. Eventually, if you experiment enough, you come to those conclusions, and then we wind up having a lot of intercultural communication that may or may not have been documented over time. We know of various types of communication, like verbal communication. We also think about things like telepathy and other types of the communication that may not currently be measurable. Sometimes it's observable. Occasionally it's repeatable. But it's enough that we at least have a common language to describe certain things that we could strive to one day make more measurable and achievable. But yeah, I think the just to kind of like bring it around to what you were saying about how how a lot of the stones were cut and formed. So one of the things about stone and metal and most matter is that it is crystalline, meaning that it's a long string of atoms. That there's a long string of atoms that are connected in a certain way. And with stone, if you apply pressure to the right place, just a little bit of pressure will crack stone in half. If you just kind of understand how everything lines up. You learn this through experimentation, through learning from other people, and having that understanding of how matter is put together in order to be able to manipulate it and shape it and do things like create shelters, or just morph that matter into something else, like combine different things. That's all done with having an understanding of how matter organizes itself. And once we understand some of these different patterns, we can use our imaginations to create experiments to figure out how to combine these different bits of knowledge and experiment with that, see what the effects are. So to me, knowledge is sacred, and geometry, the the knowledge of understanding different types of relationships that are explainable using mathematics. That's a thing that's very sacred, and it needs to be treasured and protected, especially now that we're in this kind of time period where rational thought and understanding is really under attack by kind of these like populist political forces that are seeking to control society through pushing people into these kind of irrational spaces and instigating wars or irrational and concocted reasons, or ones that are just kind of based around greed. And we're kind of bombarded with this misinformation nowadays. So I would say that that knowledge itself, true knowledge of how things work in the world, is absolutely sacred. And when we see these symbols built into temples, pyramids, and other types of structures, it's good to be thankful to those who came before us, who took the time to articulate these ideas in a physical form in ways that make them kind of beautiful, stand out. And it's something that we should treasure.
There's definitely questions in me in relation to this. Forrest, did you want to say anything, or would you like me to speak first?
I'm open. I was going to potentially respond to the notion of sacredness and sacred geometry a bit, but honestly, I can wait. I'd rather have you go.
Okay. Yeah, I think where I am is still in relation to that as well, Forrest. And maybe one way to frame some of what Scott has brought there in sharing the importance of gratitude for those who have taken the time to share knowledge in a beautiful way. And that's certainly something that I was struck by, and is perhaps the universal experience most people have when they, behold the pyramids with that grandiosity and that sense of beauty. In that recognition, there's a sense that some forms of knowing or recollections or symbols or guides to, as Scott says, how things work are particularly sacred. And that was juxtaposed to a context where in the present day, in some instances, we might be everything from, mistreating knowledge or perverting it in a manner so as to make more ignorant people in various regards. You could look at different kinds of propaganda and all sorts of things. And so I continue to be circling around the question of how it could be, and seems to me plausible, without risking kind of, because the risk would be a kind of a top-down imposition of this is the most sacred knowledge, remember this, right? When maybe it's something a little bit more bound to the individual image of beauty in a way that isn't perhaps sufficiently open or capable of relating and transmitting and sharing knowledge in a manner that draws into becoming others. So there's a danger of, in a sense, a kind of, desiring to take one path and occluding others. But at the same time, it seems to me that rituals for gathering, rituals for remembering, that locate us in the solar system, that locate us in the galaxy, that locate us in deep cycles of the natural flows, of course, in their processes of change on Earth, that seems to be a kind of orientation for relative stability, in which that would serve as a kind of a profound basis for sharing knowledge. So I'm interested in those sorts of things. I was speaking to someone once about even something as simple as maybe for a minute every 3 months stepping outside with people from other parts of the world and orienting towards a particular star system or something to share an appreciation as that representation of a sort of greater than pattern that we're embedded in as the basis for a very minimal kind of ritual of return. I haven't actually invited that yet, but it's been on my mind for the last 3-4 years. So that's sort of where my mind is in relation, and curious how you think about sacred geometry, perhaps in relation to that, but of course in relation to everything Scott shared and brought today, Forrest.
Yeah, I hear a lot of questions that I also find personally meaningful as well in what you're suggesting. Going back to the notion of sacredness itself, one frame that I've found personally useful to clarify like what is the sacred was to consider the notion of ultimate meaningfulness. Like that if we think of notion of sacredness as being a word that points to something, and to try to get a sense as to what makes something sacred is that it's intensely meaningful. It matters. It's like, it's important. And so in that sense, the notion of sacred as a signifier is to point to that which is the most important, or something that is important in a kind of transcendental way, or a way that goes beyond just the ephemeral of day-to-day life. So in that sense, we think of some things or some ideas or some notions, the notion of divinity or the notion of life as being sacred in the sense that it has an ultimate meaning. It has a kind of indelible relevance. And so in this sense, I tend to think of life as being like a great exemplar of the notion of what we mean by, or what I at least mean by when I say the word sacred. But that's a difference between what does the word mean and what do I include in the class of things that I would point to as being sacred. Those are two different questions. But I personally have found that to be profoundly meaningful and useful to really clarify my own thinking about this. So when we come to the question of sacred geometry, now I have this same sort of hesitation that you had, which is, who am I to presume what would be counted in that space? But I can say that for my own part, that I noticed that there are things which are geometric patterns that have this sort of reference to things which are meaningful, and to the degree that I experience certain kinds of patterns in life, like spirals and circles and lines and right angles and triangles and stuff like this. There's a sense in which there's a notion that these are recurring images. There's recurring holders of symbolism that have kind of felt the same way to many cultures. There's a classic example of a sort of psychological experiment where they have two characters, Kiki and Boba. I might not be pronouncing that right, but there's these two characters, and one of them, they give you two drawings, and one of the drawings has this really sharp, angle kind of thing, and the other drawing is sort of this sort of rounded, bulbous kind of thing, and of course, they ask, well, which one's which, and people will always associate Kiki with the sharp angled one and Bobo with the rounded one. And so there's this sense in which, and this was done over a wide variety of cultures, whether they spoke English or not. The sound itself had a connotative suggestion connecting it to a kind of geometrical theme. So in this sense, when we think of triangles and circles and spirals and stuff, there's a sense in which we just all naturally have a kind of fundamental association with those that is occurring at probably a very primal and biological level. So in that sense, I would say, well, okay, that would be a good exemplar of what I would think of as sacred geometry, as geometry that sort of evokes that sense of meaningfulness just through the very nature of it. So, alignments in nature, alignments in buildings, proportion and ratio, and particularly I've noticed that Euler curves I find to be particularly something that occurs very often in nature and in engineering, but is kind of hardly remarked. But at the same time, like almost any imagery that involves Euler curves as part of its underlying geometry, I tend to notice has a very strong aesthetic appeal. Same with golden ratio kind of things. Like you see that in nature everywhere, the kind of Fibonacci sequence and spirals of flowers and stuff like that is constant recurring theme. If you kind of learn the lens of what that ratio looks like, you start to see it everywhere. So that also occurs frequently in sacred geometry. So then your next sort of question, and this is where things start to get, at least to me personally, a lot more interesting, which is, we're talking about the relationship between learning and intentionality, particularly in regards to individual persons, individual lifetimes. And I notice that in a certain sense that learning is a empowering thing. Like if I receive wisdom from some previous culture, I receive a teaching from a university or a book or a friend or something like that I, through the capacity that the knowledge, the sort of recurring notion of patterns of life or humanity or relationships in nature or whatnot, that in effect it increases my ability to sense and to know the world, and also to make choices within the world, within the domains about which I've learned. So in a sense, to teach is a kind of fundamental enabling thing to one's own choice. And so in the sense of love is that which enables choice, then in effect teaching people is a loving act. It's a caring act. And it's specifically in this sense of love is that which enables choice that we notice that the notion of the intentionality is the intentionality of the person receiving the knowledge, not the person giving the knowledge. So in effect, there's a sense in which, if we think of, like say you have a very, powerful or rich person has a lot of connection to politics, for example, and he has this, desire to compel people to act a certain way, and he puts together some policy and gets it passed as a law, and now there's this enforcement arm that's going to make that happen. And in that sense, he has exerted his will on the future population even after he dies. And so in a sense, there's a notion of agency that can extend beyond a person's life. But, the question that I hear you asking, Tim, is something along the lines of, to what degree is it really valid for me to exercise such agency, right? If learning is essentially something where I'm giving future generations a choice, but then I take away their choices, which essentially imposing on them, you're going to deal with this statue, or you're going to deal with this policy, or you're going to be forced to pay homage to this altar that I've created, or something like that. That in effect I've actually disabled the future generations. I've essentially compelled them to make choices in accordance to my will. But the problem is that, I'm not going to benefit from that after I've passed. Like there's no way in which any sense of egoic entitlement is actually really occurring to me personally, right? So in effect, there's this notion here that, you've had your time on Earth. You're no longer a participant in the story of life. You're no longer a participant in the game, and so you're trying to enforce a condition of your winning. is selfish. It's a kind of fundamental misunderstanding as to what it means to be making good choices, to be enabling future generations for them to have an equal opportunity to make choices and to play the game of life the same way that you have. And so in effect, there's a sense here in which, I'm basically just sort of acknowledging that, we all have a seat at the table for the time that we have a seat at the table, and no longer and no less. And that there's a sense in which, if we're looking at learning something and encoding that in some symbol, in some sacred geometry, it's not for the benefit of the person that is carving that sacred geometry into the rock. It's for the person that is going to be seeing it at some future point. So to what degree can we genuinely make a gift to the future that doesn't necessarily have embedded within it some notion of our personal agency to try to compel them to learn this or not learn that, or to be this way or to not be that way? The gift is the gift of the best of what we can give. And this is all that we can do, right? To try to do anything else is essentially to go against the notion of sacredness of life itself. So in a certain sense, to distill a learning down to some essential thing that is fundamentally enabling of whoever experiences that in whatever future age. Part of it is that, by simplifying it down to something as elemental as a geometric figure, is essentially to say, hey, I give up agency and I'm going to give it to some future generation. And so in this sense, it may be the case that the only thing we can do is allude to the kinds of things that ultimately matter, the kinds of discussions that we have found enabling in our lives, and hope that we can essentially convey to the future in some way, maybe through some symbolic conveyance or some sacred writing or poem, or maybe just the glyph, and that's all we've got. So I think that to some extent, if I disentangle the notion of learning and agency, or learning and intentionality, right? Intentionality being the purpose to which learning could be applied through the agency of an individual, or through an agency of some group, and to really be mindful as to the degree to which power must ultimately be transcended by care.
Taking notes.
Thank you, Forrest. Good to see you. Really, really grateful for your reflections and sharings there. Yeah, it's very humbling, and at the same time, that there is anything to share at all, that the aspiration toward giving a gift to the future is valid. It's very profound, very, very profound, and I suppose what that means at the narrative, or perhaps, let's say the narrative level, but maybe more than just that, depending on what we mean about the nature of the evolution of the cosmos, the nature of, say, increase in complexity, doesn't quite have the pop to it that I'm looking for here exactly, but something of an increase in the, in some words I like, with the integrity of the living history of the cosmos, in a sense, that in gifting something to the future, to the degree that can be received and transmuted into something which, as Forrest is inviting us to consider here, is as that which enables choice, is a very profound thing indeed, and would signal to me that there's a uniqueness about that event occurring in cosmos. But at the same time, I wonder about how we might articulate that process, perhaps being part of the story of life and the evolution of the universe in general. Of course, we are repositories of memory, and we are endowed with our bodies and with the commons of our language at another level, although that can for sure encode things that might not be quite the gift we could hope for, are nevertheless capacity enabling, creativity enabling, choice enabling. And so it's that everyday kind of unique, permeating everything kind of unique, but nevertheless something at the level of, abstract knowledge and sacred geometry, in terms of that aspiration toward that profundity of encoding or compression, or something which lasts and which is has a real richness of bounty in it for others. That is sort of evoked to me in the pyramids, and certainly, and although it's politically a rather sketchy topic in some sense, because the way in which tourism and geopolitics and governments interplay with populations, it still nevertheless is the case that the pyramids are a profound draw for the people of Egypt, and at least the people who were part of the hotel that was looking after us. There was a sense of gratitude there from one of the gentlemen I was speaking to, that the pyramids were in effect, a gift in that regard for them. They were a livelihood, and that people were attracted to their beauty. But yeah. So would anybody like to offer some closing reflections? And of course, Scott as well. We didn't quite get to covering some of your work investigating sites that might serve for kind of practice ground for living on Mars. I know your interest in that is a lot to do with, ecological devastation, and an attempt to understand in what way could living be possible in an environment that has been stripped of a lot of the complexity of its ecological environment. There's obviously a lot in there, but at the technological level and just how you're thinking about that, I'm interested in that. And Australia is a pretty good place to. I was watching Mad Max Furiosa the other day, so Australia is a pretty good spot, to imagine those conditions.
You want me to go into that for a couple moments? How much
Well,
time do we have?
Well, what I'll do is I'll just, as we sort of schedule this for a couple hours, I'm very much glad to stick around, at least for another 30 minutes or so myself. But I'll just give the opportunity for people, if they'd like to, make their exit. You're welcome to. I'm very grateful to have you join us. And yeah, if anybody would like to connect with Scott, be glad to connect you in an email as well. And so I'll make that invitation. Thank you, everybody. And then Scott, please, if you would like to speak at length, you're very welcome. And folks can let themselves out if they'd like, and I'll stick around with you.
Well, I thank everyone for coming to this. Yeah, I'm excited to hear your feedback, and appreciate the feedback, the thoughts around this. Sometimes it feels pretty isolated to work on these projects, and I'm only just starting to bring some of them to the public now. So it's nice to hear either feedback or the thoughts that are evoked by these. So thank you, Forrest. I appreciate it. I see your message. And like I said, I've actually been taking notes through the whole thing. Yes.
I am going to step out though, but I appreciate, thank you. And yeah, someday I hope to hear more about what you've discovered, and learn more about kind of where you've gone more recently. So, but I do have to go. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Forrest. Thank you.
Yeah, well, yeah, certainly, Scott. You'll find that, you'll find many people in this context and the broader networks who, I mean, I would say care a lot about it. For me, it's so challenging because I get that sense of isolation, but I also I connote that isolation a little bit to, speaking on behalf of myself, a kind of like the necessary inadequacy or lack in terms of recognizing that there is so much that needs to change, will change, irrespective of what I have to do about it in culture. And then there might be a desire to orient or create some possibility for living that is a little wiser, a little more conducive to health, but sort of the recognition that as soon as one steps further toward the fringe, perhaps to actually care more for the core, you know, paradoxically, that actually there's a tremendous amount lacking, in the sense that it's the beginning of the journey, and the technologies and the rituals and the history is all still to be developed and lived, in a sense, you know. The what comes next in the transitions that we're currently experiencing is there's so many like wild actors on the stage and absurdities that yeah, it's totally wild, but I do believe there's many people interested in learning about the various experiments and efforts people are making to, you know, begin to see in what way the water can run, or what channels the water runs as it sort of tips into a new land or something like that. You kind of can model it, but you got to find out, you know, what happens to the water. And yeah, come along with me on this new trickle as it enters, you know, a new environment. It's pretty wild.
One of the things that I often think when just feeling the kind of bombarded by this irrational stuff, it's kind of like right-wing populist propaganda that, or whatever it is, whatever we want to call it, whatever name will eventually be used to describe whatever this is. This too shall pass, because it's fueled by money, and eventually the budget will run out when certain agendas have been achieved. So it's good to kind of step back, do a detox from that stuff, and just kind of think of it all in scale and perspective.
An idea just popped into me then. I've been writing a lot about attention, and in the context of some of the conversation we've been having, you know, the pyramids do seem, if nothing else, to inculcate that sense of wonder, awe, and so in that regard, it's a kind of overwhelming, a frame breaking in terms of the perception of what's possible, and there's a call to attention in that. And you know, one could argue there's the possibility then of deepening attention to the degree one applies their curiosity, but a necessary expansion of attention, or expansion of perspective, to the degree one can stay with that boundary breaking transformation. And the reason that comes to me is because, you know, writing a lot about the relation between capital and attention, and it seems like so much of capital is put towards, at the present time, debilitating attention, and there's questions around what capacity will remain when that dynamic eventually collapses, which I think it must. But in there, I think there's really valuable questions to ask and responses to experiment with about the kinds of contributions that can be made toward the increase and cultivation of attention. Because if this too shall pass, the question is kind of, well, what capacities do we have when whatever the thing is passes? And so, you know, and I know that that kind of links up a little bit with one of the perspectives I had about your work when we were over there in Egypt, which is, of course, if you're trying to back engineer advanced but potentially forgotten stoneworking technologies, and I think you did say something like, well, if we lose electrical capacity, you know, and so on, then what kind of lines of technological development actually would be really valuable to know without that? And that would kind of speak to that as a line of thinking. And that's maybe a bit of a link to some of your investigation in some of the lands you're looking at. So if you would like to share just a little bit on that before we wrap up, it would be nice to just hear about it, because I'm curious about what you're doing, obviously, what you found in Australia, and like how much a part of your life is that currently.
Okay, well, I'll try to tie those things together. One of the things that I've been thinking about recently is the strategy that's being used in terms of making fundamental knowledge inaccessible to those who don't have money to pay for it. With tax by the current government that we have in the U.S. Toward things like the Wikimedia Foundation or the Internet Archive, places where there are repositories for knowledge. A tax on libraries and public broadcasting, things that are not driven by commerce, but more driven by the desire to store this knowledge. And it's not just in this country. There are a lot of forces around the globe that see a lot of advantage for putting a paywall in between this knowledge that's been made accessible via the internet. One of the things that I was talking about earlier with the film project that I was doing was based around this concept. Filmmaker Truffaut once said that film will only become art when its tools are as inexpensive as paper and pencil, or something to that degree, something like that, paraphrasing it. So when where digital video became widely accessible, and when we began being able to use phones to shoot a video, edit it, upload it, distribute it, and create models like it's made communication very, very easy, for better or for worse. But you can store an instructional video online with as much ease as you can some, I don't know, just piece of disinformation, like bad, just bad, I don't know, just fluff. And if you have the address and the access to that currently, you can download this stuff. But it's very important to not take the access to this for granted, and to think about how to store this information, repeat it, and put it out there in the world. There's a project that I really like called Internet in a Box. It basically is it's a microcontroller that has that you can jam a storage device in. And there are projects like that use low power radio in order to connect us via the internets without the use of the telecommunications networks, and the communication is repeated via this kind of like low power protocol. These are really important projects in the context of the current deluge of misinformation and disinformation, especially when it comes to understanding the fundamentals of the knowledge that we have. We can think about all the amazing things that were stored in the library at Alexandria, which burned, or all of the libraries that might have burned, or all of the scrolls that were kept in caves that may have disintegrated and become moldy over time, and things that were probably simple and mundane techniques to the ancients in terms of building profound structures. Some of that knowledge is still in existence, and some of it's lost. But what it does, it reinforces the importance of putting in the effort to articulate these ideas in such a way such that they're accessible and repeatable. The way that this ties into the current project that I'm doing, which I have a few moments left, I guess, to talk about this, but I've been for a long time, I've been thinking about how to protect the biosphere on Earth, how to protect our environments that we live in, this kind of very precious bit of protection that we have on this Earth that protects us from cosmic rays and the vacuum of space. It's just this very thin layer of gases around the planet that's our kind of life support system. And in thinking about how to do that, like how to apply that type of environmental idea in a kind of activist way, I usually turn to creative projects and things that hopefully inspire people to think in different ways and overlap multiple things. And so what that basically came down to is creating a project that prepares for the biodevastation, the climate biodevastation that we're beginning to experience on Earth. It's likely caused by humans and fossil fuels. Basically preparing for that and in practical ways. But by thinking about how to solve for that at the same time as solving for something that's kind of interesting and sexy as space exploration. So a few years ago, I was chosen to be part of a mission at the Mars Desert Research Station in Utah, which is a facility run by the Mars Society. My partner Liz and I were asked by our friend Roger to be part of this mission, in which we would do a 2-week-long immersion in which we simulated being astronauts on Mars, where we're isolated. We could only go outside with spacesuits. Our communications with the outside world were staggered. We weren't in a pressurized environment, but it was isolated nevertheless in a space that simulates what it's like to be on Mars, kind of like a very similar geographical locale in the high desert of Utah in the United States. And while I was there, I reflected a lot on how I could use these types of exercises and simulations and space exploration to teach an overlap of respect for Earth, but also encourage people to think in cooperative and collaborative ways, and to create governing systems that allow for autonomy and collective action. Ones that are rigorous in terms of the science that's being done, that kind of gives us practice in the practice of gathering data. So it inspired me to go a lot deeper, and I created this project called Offworld Voyage. The concept is to basically overlap exploration on Mars or other planets, with what it takes to prepare for climate biodevastation, which means creating biospheres, which means understanding what there is around us and doing it in a very rigorous way that is not necessarily connected to the types of space or the types of thought processes around institutional space programs that you might see coming from governments, corporations, maybe religious entities, really, but more so thinking about human autonomy and just kind of treating things in a very precious way. So what brought me to Australia a while ago was to give a talk about this project, Offworld Voyage. And basically, I've been working on modular designs for ecologically sustainable, zero waste facilities that can be used. That can be used for.
I'll just quickly say goodbye in voice as well. Thanks for coming along today, Scott, and I'll catch you all later on. Bye.
Okay. So so I guess what I was saying is that I wanted to create a way of overlapping space exploration, preparing for space exploration with preparing for climate biodevastation, and being very explicit about these things, and being very explicit in figuring out ways to do communications that deal with conflict resolution while avoiding hierarchical decision making, where we can all participate in having a sense of agency in our operating as a group toward our survival. So I designed these bases with my friend Michael Flood, they're all called the Tesseract, Mars Tesseract. So Mars Analog Research Station Tesseract 1 or Tesseract 2, 3, 4, 5, several different configurations of these modular bases, many of which they all incorporate some element of growing food in this kind of sustainable way. So growing algae, or using hydroponics and aeroponics techniques, growing fungi, growing bacteria, doing experiments in processing all different types of waste, and like in a small enclosed space, whether it's waste from us as humans, like how do we deal with the gases? We convert the gases into plastics or fuels and different types of things, and how do we turn these things into fertilizers? How do we keep ourselves mentally healthy while we're in these kind of isolated pockets? How do we encourage understanding of health and wellness? Like how to keep that going? And so Offworld Voyage is the project that I came up with to deal with that. And so I was there trying to give a talk at the Esoteric Festival, which unfortunately was canceled.
We were going to do something there too, Cam and I, so we missed out on hanging out with you there.
Yeah, really sad. I'm sad about that. But I was able to go down and give a talk about Offworld Voyage at Dragon Town in Tasmania, which was great. So I was able to experience a proper Duff and met a lot of fantastic people and made some really great friends. I'm hoping to be able to come and give a presentation at Earth Frequency. I'm going to be coming back to Australia with Liz later this year to give a talk at the International Astronautical Congress, which is happening in Sydney at the end of September, beginning of October. I was thinking about kind of spending the month, like basically coming there and then setting up an astronaut training facility somewhere in the middle of the country. Been talking to some folks at Arkarula about maybe doing it there. 'Cause it's apparently very similar to Mars. The geography is similar to Mars in a lot of ways. So I'm hoping to explore that. And yeah, maybe get some of the people from from lots of kind of free thinking communities to come together and maybe spend a bit of time doing that. And then after we wrap up doing this, doing an immersion where we'll have astronauts and we'll have a mission support and a little pop-up city and kind of a little celebration and whatnot, and then head over to Earth Frequency, where I'll either give a presentation about it, either officially or just non-officially. Yeah, so those are some of the kind of hopes around that. And if you're interested in seeing a little bit and hearing a little bit more about that, you can check out a talk that we just gave at Republica in Berlin. I gave a talk with Liz about the project. Yeah, it's called Offworld Voyage, designing a plant-based Mars base. Yeah, and yeah, so I just wanted to kind of bring that up. And how do we tie this together at the end? Because I guess we're coming close to the end of our time. I guess the connection for me between doing this kind of future forward project and the project of looking at ancient technologies, the way that I see these connected is just a matter of using our creativity and whimsy and play and good humor and good vibes to be able to understand the world that we live in and understand ourselves a little bit better. And that we have these creative projects as a way of giving ourselves the opportunity to exercise our knowledge and creativity in fun ways that are not defined in any particular rigid way. I guess I'll just encourage anyone who's listening to say that, if you're curious about science and you don't have a degree, that's totally okay. There's a thing called citizen science where you can participate in the gathering of knowledge, dissemination of knowledge. We're at a time where you don't necessarily have to have degrees in order to participate in these things. In fact, at the beginning of science, during the Enlightenment, well, there wasn't really an institutional expression. Art and science were essentially the same, part of the same thing. It's kind of understanding how to play with ideas and understanding the world around us a bit better, understanding our place in the universe, and using that as source material for our creative endeavors. And we're still living in that era of enlightenment. It's amazing that we're able to just pick up a phone and learn anything we want to, if we like, anywhere around the world at this point, most places around the world.
Yes, if you can dodge the algorithmic landmines, then you can
Oh, remember
learn.
this: social media and surveillance capitalist platforms are only a tiny, tiny, tiny part of the internet. And all we have to do to dodge those things is just not participate. We can always use search engines to search what we want. We can always use independent networks, like Fediverse, like it's on my shirt. Fediverse, which is like Mastodon as an example of that, which is basically a self-hosted internet. You can run your own node. You don't have to really know a lot. You can participate in the network. Blue Sky as well. So yeah, while there's a lot of trickery in order to harvest our attention and keep us engaged and scrolling and whatnot, we can always put in the effort to say no and go and do something else. It's the worst thing to feel like you're missing out, like when you're participating in something and you just that you're that it's a terrible thing to understand, to come to the understanding that your attention is being exploited and harvested and thought of as a commodity, and that a lot of it is it's designed not just to be extractive, but also to but to prevent people from feeling a sense of agency in their own lives, to give them a sense of hopelessness. And it's done through repetition, it's done through hypnotism, but it's our choice if we become aware of it. Do we continue to participate? And what steps do we need to take to disengage from it and to create a balance so that we know what's going on in the world at the same time as keeping our wits about us? And how do we communicate these ideas and concepts to other people? How do we teach other people to detangle their brains from this toxic mess, from all this marketing that goes toward making people believe that things like acceptance of artificial intelligence, that it's an inevitability? This is all just marketing, making people believe that it's sentient when it's actually just a bunch of, it's like understanding how to create natural language patterns and plugging things into it such that it gives the illusion of sentience. And I guess that's a whole other conversation about it. But I think the most important thing out of all of this is to kind of like to remind ourselves to feel centered. If we feel like we're being manipulated, it's time for as much of a detox as we possibly can give ourselves. And we can't beat ourselves up if we have a hard time doing it. It's worth putting in the effort and finding other people who are trying to deal with the same types of things, with these addictions, create language around it, common language, so that we can push away. Because these people who run these corporations have spent a lot of money on understanding our natural patterns and inclinations in order to hijack our thought processes as a way of creating social control.
Absolutely. Yeah, these and more, very much the questions. Absolutely. It's good to see you, Scott. Thank you for sharing your time. Nice to catch up on some things. Nice to introduce you to a few people here as well. Although Cam hasn't said much. These are awesome people. Yeah. All right, we'll bring it to a close.
Thank you, Les, and thank you, Cameron, and thank you, Tom, for coming and being part of this. I'd love to hear some stuff.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna keep my headphones on and like make myself some food. So if people want to stick around, they're welcome to as well. Les, I'll ask you to turn your video back on there. We can't see you. But yeah, Les, it'd be great for Scott to hear if you have any reflection to share.
I'll just say goodbye now. But thank you so much, Scott. I just wanted to reflect back to you the sense of wonder I had when I was listening to some of your life story. There's a part of me that has deep reverence for that ability to take things from the imagination and bring them into the world. And I'm experiencing you as quite masterful at that. So yeah, thank you for sharing that presence with us today. And it's kind of invigorated certain juices in me that I'm going to go now and channel. So yeah. And thank you, Tim and Cam and Liz. It's good to see you guys.
Why not just start a pirate radio media company, pyramid investigating operation, go to Mars, do it all on a bicycle powered vegan making, you know what I mean? Why not?
Yeah, and the thing is, it's super cheap to do it. It's super cheap.
Am I on here now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good.
Hi, Les.
Hi. Well, a delight to hear all of that. And one of the things that, like, all the time you've been doing that, I didn't know you existed. And there's ways in which that's a very, very good thing. I've been looking at the way in which it's been useful that my life has the quality of being segmented. So there's people that don't know anything about my background. And that sometimes is a very useful thing. And sometimes it's not.
He said segmented.
Yeah, segmentation. So I was once part of a group where everybody knew everything about everybody. And if you ended up with a black mark on your forehead, which I've got, everyone knew about it. And no matter how hard I tried to rub it off, the black mark was still there. And if I met those people who knew me back in 1970, they would immediately recognise my 1970 self and not my present one. So there's advantages of being able to move on. But one of the things to me is I've been out into the central Australia, and I was there for a little while, but it was a short, a magnificent delight to get back to when you didn't have freezing cold nights and you had blue skies and green grass and green trees everywhere. The one thing that every time I see Mars, I say, we've got to look after this jewel that we have, planet Earth. So that's the big message that comes out of fancy living, eating sewage and making sure that the sewage has been turned into air and you can't go outside and play in the grass. That's a hell of a lifestyle. So that's the message that comes across to all Mars research. Look after planet Earth. That's my little road.
Thoroughly agree.
Yeah.
We need to, yeah.
So one of the things, just to give a bit of contribution, I have been tapping into the transcultural wisdom of the indigenous people of the Southeast Asia, Oceania, Australasia region. I've also had to look at deep immersion into the sociology of knowing, all the German sociologists that are virtually untranslatable. Having a German sociologist that was able to translate that, being mentored by one of the world's four leaders in therapeutic community, how you can come together in community in ways where self-organising emergent phenomena are extraordinarily transformative. And I have set up an archive, can be found under the word LACEWeb, LACEWEB.org.au. And when I've just been over in Egypt, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I did the biography, sociology as biography of a psychiatrist. So now the World Psychiatric Association invites me for the third time. So I've just been speaking in Alexandria on what I learned from Indigenous women about how to pick up yourself after a day of torture. Dance all evening until you're ready to sleep with your 14 girlfriends that have all been tortured and raped by the militia, and then have a group hug, imagining leaving after the end of the week, pretending to be traumatized, and then going around into the arms of all your girlfriends on Friday night so you can dance with them. So I was telling that story, that there's ways of being in the world where the very best or worst that they can throw at you, you can shake off, regain symmetry, regain breathing, put all of the nasty neurochemicals back to sleep in storage very quickly, and get on with a marvellous life. So that was my storyline. And I had all the Egyptian women, because I was talking primarily about women. I got loved it from all the Egyptian women. That's my little right.
Yeah, that's profound. Just how what you were saying about dance and movement helping us to transform trauma.
Well, see, in my travels, amongst all of these, I went to remote places on rickety old buses with one wheel where I would look out the side and it was a 400-500-foot drop. I couldn't even see the road. I was going to these places. And I never found symptoms of trauma amongst any of these women. All the things in the West that we see as classic symptoms of trauma, I never saw any trace of it amongst any of these. They were quite wonderful. Like, I had to pinch myself. You went through that. Yeah. And then there's some beautiful women up in the Philippines where I went and did a professional development for 24 of their professors using their own Filipino indigenous psychologies as a frame for our experiencing ourselves together in a group. And what came out there was the extent to which there is wisdom in these places that have practical application in the Western world. And these women had gone and interviewed 800 children that live on Smoky Mountain, which is one of the major tips. It's tips. And they went there to hear the stories of the children, not to go and save them. The children all had parents and the fathers who hit them with sticks. So I would prefer to live on the tip. What they did was to hear their stories and to find the ways in which they had resilience in their lives. And they went and identified all of those resilience patterns of acting out, of pretending, of having visual imagery, of body approaches, movement approaches. And now they're teaching all of those resilience ways that actually come from 5-year-olds, 6 and 7-year-olds. There is extraordinary wisdom to be shared. So one of the things I'm tapping is the self-organising nature of the fringe, going out into Western Victoria and down in Eastern Victoria, and finding that self-help and mutual help is really alive in the Victorian countryside. That's and it's when you talk about it, you say, what are you talking about? It's just the way we live our lives. One guy I go and visit, he's had about 30 people help him build his shed. He just had all the 30 of them. So I went down to be there when all of these 30 people brought food to share. One of the most marvellous afternoons I've spent in the last 30 years. Mutual help, people helping people. That's my big rap. I've loved everything you've said. When I look at myself on the camera, I don't identify with that old guy at all. I'm about 33. I feel 33 inside. That poor old bastard, he needs someone to look after him. So good to hear you.
Good to hear you too. And it sounds like you've remembered how to play.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things I'm able to do deep internal trance, and I go into a profoundly deep, and I have been about 6 months ago I stopped, but the previous 18 months I was spending up to 12, 14 hours a day in deep trance with my fingers on the keyboard, reliving aspects of the first 9 years of my life. I confirmed with my mother before I died that I had absolute accurate knowledge of when I was 8 months old. I told my mother, you weren't happy with your sisters-in-law saying I had to have a boy's haircut. And I had to get out of having little curly ringlets and dressed in a crocheted dress to fulfill your fantasy of having a little daughter. She said, how do you know that? And so I'm pulling up Lucer's work, Luscher, who talks about synaptic replication. When you do what you've just done, having 2 hours of profound, deep wisdom and having another person paying rapt attention to everything you're saying and how you're saying it, that literally creates a splitting at the synaptic level and synaptic duplication like mitosis in the first splitting of the cell into 2 to 4. And so in that deep work, I am reliving, looking out of my own eyes, seeing the world as a 2-year-old, and I can touch type in that state. And when I read what I've touch typed, it's in my 2-year-old language, not my current language. Or it's in my 3-year-old language. And for the first 3 years, I had my own language. Like I would say chimney instead of chimney, and Wanda. And Mr. Barford's painting his ass purple, not his bottom, but his house. Now, I reverted to all of my earlier language, and it came out as 2 or 3 words in the line, and what the linguists call enjambment. So you had to go to the start of the next line to create meaning. Because
What is the word?
enjambment, E-N-G-A-M-B-M-E-N-T, where the line is so short that the syntax doesn't allow meaning. And so it keeps on throwing the reader into trance until they get to the next one. And I've learned psycholinguistics. So even in this stuff, I am profoundly using conjunctions all the time. So my sentences go for about 15 pages. And I've now got about 140 little vignettes of what happened in the first 9 years of my life. Some of them are absolutely appalling, shocking, humorous, playful. But every little bit of it is profoundly playful. So I have been immersing myself in return to play in its full enrichment. My second year in sociology of knowledge was sociology of play, with required reading Homo Ludens by Husinger. If you have come across that, Homo Ludens, L-U-D-E-N. And he is brilliant. Play to order is not play. Games are not play. So there was a particular magic about play and playfulness. There's a couple of things you might like to chase up. Husinger, H-U-I-Z-I-N-G-A, I think. Yeah. I've had over 2 people from 280 countries have a look at LaceWeb. I've stopped looking at the data back in about 2002. I've written 9 books. I've had about 22,000 downloads. On the start
Definitely
of
go to
LaceWeb,
LaceWeb, Scott.
on the start of my LaceWeb, they're freely downloadable. I've had everything freely downloadable. That's my little ray. Thanks for all that.
You could I'd love to read some of your writing. Could maybe if you could share a link
I'll
to
link you guys in an email, and I'll
the
put
first-
Forrest in the email as well, so you can respond on that.
Yeah, the first ebook is riddled with extraordinary examples of these sorts of processes in action. Simple processes that saved my life about 7 times, because I have worked in prison environments with murderers and rapists. When I went to London, I sat in on 24 guys that were in the therapeutic community, 18 serving a life imprisonment. So really serious dudes. My stories from my youth I can email to you. I'll do that. It's the book that has all of that hypnotic language and the little vignettes is called Coming to One's Senses. Short title, by the way.
To one's senses. Okay.
Beautiful. Thank you, Les.
Good.
Cam, would you like to say any words in closing, and we'll wrap this up?
I guess there's quite a lot to speak to altogether, so I won't do that because that would be an awful lot. But one thing that is kind of crystallizing for me at the moment, considering what has been spoken to with a number of themes earlier and altogether, I love this idea of ancient sites as library-like places of signification, as well as the sacred connotations there, being beneath the framing, being beneath the language through the geometry, all these kind of things. But I was just feeling into the existential reckoning that comes with trying to convey something that might last, that might be a signal that is received in the context of what Forrest referred to there as, an offering, or something that can be related to support the capacity for consciousness to break frame, something of that nature. And just the profundity of whatever it took lifetimes to sort of formulate and construct in such a way, and just in summary, just the existential reckoning aspect of setting that up so that maybe further consciousness via organism can relate to it and make of it in some sense as signal is conveyed, across space-time. And hopefully this is an opening to engaging in process with the ineffable, which is ultimately the inspirational aspect of what enables, I think, civilizations to survive. If they break from that too much and the linguistic constructs are too dense, then there's a real danger there of being stuck in loops. And that's why we engage in processes for opening up and being at one with the ineffable. It does give us a bit of a reset and an ability to relate beyond the frame. And so, there's a lot there, obviously, when it comes to the nature of what's emerged on this planet and, how we relate to the systems and each other and all the complexity, but within the domain of our own capacities.
Thank you. That seemed like a good place to land it, Scott. Does that work for you?
Fantastic. Thank you, Cameron. That was a fantastic closing. I appreciate that. I think I'm going to probably use some of the language that you've just shared in my own description. I love this idea, the existential reckoning, the setting up of these sites. It's a really beautiful way of, and an elegant way of describing it. So yeah, thank you so much for that.
Awesome. Well, it'd be great to hear from you, Scott, when you are closer to coming to Australia. And Les, Journey, Cam, and myself, we're all in Melbourne, and Tom is in New Zealand, but hopefully he'll be able to join around that time of year, depending on what happens. Forrest is in San Diego, but a little closer to you. But yeah.
No, thank you so much, Tim, for introducing me to everybody. It seems like you have a very good peer group of thinkers and doers and feelers, and I feel pretty honored and humbled to be introduced to such profound people. So thank you. Really, thank you so much.
Hey, that is awesome. It's awesome to see you again. Awesome to see you again. And I'm very curious about the continued development of the back engineering. I think that's very exciting. So
and thanks. I'll be saying goodbye. I'm off to get cover.
Yes. Also, I'm going to ask in that email, Forrest wrote a paper some years ago about small group governance process, the relation between democracy, meritocracy, and consensus. I think you might find it interesting for some of the stuff you were speaking about, Scott, in terms of potential governance protocols for small groups.
On that theme, my mentor used to run big groups of 180 people. So I've had lots of preparation with that. So I have run over 160 groups of 180 with the challenge to keep them at 90% experiential. And all of the best things that I learned on how to do that is in the lace web. It's called healing group process. So you'll see a complete masses and masses and masses of things to do in this group facilitation experientially, where any things that I was saying was primarily setting up next experiences and being guided by the group. So the group as a group says what's to happen next. So yeah, that's another resource. Okay, thanks.
Awesome. All right, everyone. I'll end the call for us all here. And thank you.
Welcome to having the email from America.
I shall do so.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye,
Bye.
everybody.
See you later.
Much love.